You sound quite young, Jim. You don't sound to me like you're somebody who. You don't sound like you're somebody who flew aeroplanes in World War II. I'm wondering whether I'm speaking to the right man.
Yes, you are. In fact, as I was flying up until just July last year, I had built 3 kit airplanes, experimental airplanes, but it's got to be a bit of a drag, and I finally got rid of my last airplane just last summer.
Do you mind if I run through a series of questions, Jim, just to try and get a feel for things here? Some of them are going to be a bit mundane, so you'll have to bear with me, I'm afraid. Okay, so we'll try and get through the boring stuff really quickly. So, do you mind me asking what year you were born?
Yep, 1923.
1923. And do you mind if I have the date?
July 13th.
July 13. Okay. Was that in Portland?
Oh no, I was born and raised in Hawaii.
Hawaii. Okay, because I googled. Pardon me.
My family had been there. My father was born there also. My grandfather went there in 1883 or so.
Wow. Were you in Hawaii then when the Japanese attacked?
Yes.
Okay, so you must have been in your late teens then.
I was, yes, just 18, yeah. I was 18 and a half when that happened.
Okay, and
just out of high school.
Did you see it? Did you actually see the...
No, I didn't. Where we lived was up in Manoa Valley, and that was some ways away from Pearl Harbor and Hickam Field, where most of the activity was, and certainly quite a bit further away from the Naval Air Station out at Cornell or the Army Air Corps Station at Wheeler Field up by Schofield.
I like to find out whether my pilots were good at sport, because quite a few of them were, actually.
No, I'm small of stature, and when I was going through high school, I was really too small for, the Yank football. I tried some other things, but never did was active in athletics.
Okay. It's interesting that quite a few of the pilots, particularly the fighter pilots or the guys who flew single-seaters, were all of a smaller stature, and I understand it has something to do with your ability to cope with G-forces better, because the distance between your brain and your heart is not so great.
Well, I don't know, but I don't know if you're familiar with the Air Force training scheme during World War II, but there were 3 flying phases that involved 3 different types of aircraft. You started off with a simple airplane like a Stearman, which I started off with. Then you'd advance to a more complex airplane that had and this was a BT-13, the Vultee vibrator as we called it, had a 2-speed prop, twice the horsepower of the Stearman. It had a full set of instruments. It had the ability to, and it also had night flying capability, and it had flaps. And, by the way, it also had a radio, so it was a little more complex.
Okay.
In any event, when you graduated from...
So, can I just interrupt there, Jim? Sorry, was that sort of the equivalent of a... Not the same plane, obviously, but is it the same sort of thing as a Harvard?
No, the Harvard was the next step.
Okay.
That's the advancement. That's what we call the AT-6. But when you finished basic, you either went to single-engine advanced, which was the Harvard, or you went to twin-engine advanced. And the twin-engine advanced people would go off into bombers and freighters and et cetera, and the single-engine would go off into fighters. I'm convinced that it was real scientific and basic when they had to make that decision. They said, okay, big guys to bombers, little guys to fighters.
What year did you then join the... So you referred to it a moment ago as the Army Air Corps. So I'm not sure that I think I need to get a better understanding of this, because I have this picture in my mind of the United States Army Air Force.
Well, they went through a couple of iterations there, and I don't know exactly when the change came about, but at the beginning of the war, it was the Army Air Corps, or U.S. Army Air Corps, if you wish. And then later on, it got shortened to the U.S. Army Air Force. And then after the war, in 1947, the U.S. Army Air Force became the U.S. Air Force after the British model.
And were you still in the Air Force at that stage?
No, well, let's see, that happened just after I got out. I got out in October '47, and I think October '47 is when the U.S. Air Force came into being.
So you all changed over to blue uniforms.
Yes, it was a slow change. By then I was in the Air National Guard, which is a reserve of the Air Force.
And was that in Hawaii?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, all right.
Well, let me tell you, I don't know whether it'd be of interest to you. You know, how did I get involved with flying? Well, I aspired to become a military pilot, and at that time, both the Navy and the Air Force required a minimum of 2 years of college and age 21. Well, I just graduated from high school, and I was frankly not a very good student. But in any event, after the war started, the Army Air Force changed their requirements from college to high school, and from age 21 to age 18. Man, my papers were in the next day.
Okay. And you were accepted, obviously, for flying training?
Yes, there was some period of time, you know, they had to go through the physicals and, you know, review by a board of officers, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And by the time they got a convoy together to go from Hawaii back to the mainland, it was not until August of '42 that my training actually started.
Okay. And in the RAF and the Australian Air Force and so on, you could have a warrant officer or a sergeant as a pilot. But I understand that in the US, in the Navy and the Marines and the Air Force, you were an officer.
Yes. Prior to the war, both services, at least the Marine Corps and the Navy, had enlisted pilots. The Air Force, by that time, did not. When I graduated from flying school, I was made a second lieutenant, but long about then they were graduating so on many of them what they called flight officers, which in the American scheme of things was the equivalent of a warrant officer.
Okay. Okay. And so, did you go straight on to the flying milk jug, or did you do some time on other aircraft as well?
No. After I graduated from it was Luke Air Force Base, advanced training, and was commissioned and awarded wings and had my bars pinned on me, etc. They sent me off to operational training in P47s. There was always a certain percentage of the class that they made instructor pilots, and thank goodness I did not qualify for that. But anyhow, off to P47 training, or what we called OTU, Operational Training Unit. Check this out in the jug. This was up in Massachusetts at, I can't remember the name of the field right now. But in any event, while we were there, I got about 20 hours in the jug. And then I was assigned to a newly formed group, and it was made up of a whole bunch of us young second lieutenants and some some more mature guys and older guys that served as squadron commanders and flight leaders, and they went through further training in that group. And then eventually that group as a whole moved over to England.
Was that 1943?
By the time we finished our training, and we went over, by the way, we went over on the Queen Elizabeth, 4.5 days, arrived up there in Scotland, and we were met by a liaison officer who was telling us when we were going to offload and what we was going to do after that. And he says, by the way, they have a saying around here, if you can see the hills, it's going to rain. If you can't see the hills, it is raining. But in any event, by the time we got it over to England, it was late November of '43, and we didn't begin to get our airplanes until January, and then the organization went operational in February.
Okay, were they brought over on ships, or were they flown over via Greenland?
Yeah. Well, no, when we went down, this was, the Queen Mary always went over solo because it went so fast. And actually we swung way down towards the Azores, and here it was in November, and it was quite warm. We'd be out on deck in just our shirt sleeves. And of course, once they turned north, that changed in a hurry.
Certainly does. My goodness me. You know what the Brits used to say about you guys? don't you? My dad used to say, those bloody Americans, they're overfed, oversexed, and over
I
here.
don't think they're. Okay, you heard that.
You still used to talk about...
Overpaid instead of overfed. It was overpaid.
So, yeah, my dad was still going on about that when he was almost 90 years old, so there you go.
Yeah.
Okay.
It was me, of course, when I was in there, by the time I got on to operations, I was 19. And I didn't, let's see, no, I was 20 by then. And I was halfway through my combat tour before I even turned 21. Great age to be in that kind of a situation.
Yeah.
You think you're just indestructible and, young, invincible and dumb.
I suppose that's what the Air Force wanted, really. I heard that some of the older pilots were a little less gung-ho because they kind of realised what they were doing, but the younger guys, they had the attitude that you just described. And I watched some YouTube clips recently of P47s doing ground attack in mainly in Germany, but also in Italy. I sent you that clip of that film that was introduced by Jimmy Stewart. My goodness me, that must have been pretty hairy stuff. My dad told me the story when he was flying Mosquitoes. They used to, in this one particular place, they used to practice firing at a target on the ground. Although it was a rock in the sea, and they went in quite low and line abreast. And one of the guys was brought down by a return from the rock that he just shot.
Oh boy, that hurts.
So I imagine, and he was killed, and I imagine that you guys must have faced that sort of thing all the time.
Well, yeah, we wouldn't press quite that close where you could get anything back. The only time you could press too close is if when we're doing close support, we're likely to have, more often than not, we had 500-pound bombs under the wing, and you could drop those too low and get yourself in trouble if you had an instantaneous fuse on the bomb.
Okay. And I understand that the P47 was good at ground attack. Well, one of the reasons was that if you compared it to, for example, a Hurricane or a Spitfire or a Mustang, the radiators were very vulnerable to being hit by shrapnel and so on. And if that happened, the engine would stop moving pretty quickly. Whereas with the radial engined aircraft, like the P47, that wasn't, you could take a fair bit of flak or whatever it might be and keep going.
Yes, that certainly is correct. The Jug was very strongly built. It could take a real pounding, and it would just as a platform, it certainly was no better than the P51 on air to ground delivery, but it was certainly a lot more vulnerable, to ground fire. Even a guy with a lucky Luger shot could eventually get you, but that'd never stop a Jug.
Yeah, so in terms of protection for the pilot, I presume you had a steel plate behind you.
Yes.
And I presume that the mass of the engine would provide some protection to the front. But
yes.
When I look at the cast iron model of the P47 that my son has, it's got this curved windscreen. And I thought, that couldn't be one of those big fat pieces of glass that you have on the front of a Spitfire or a Mosquito or a Beaufighter.
Yeah, that's what we had. The front piece was armor-proof. It was bulletproof glasses.
Okay.
Very thick.
Okay, because it's got the one that the model that my son has. If I'm not wrong, there's a strut that goes up the middle of the front of the cockpit, and then there were two pieces of perspex that come off either side. But that's one of the early models. I presume that you were flying the bubble, the one with the bubble canopy.
No, we started off with the Razorbacks.
Okay.
But even the Razorbacks had a flat, armor, rather a bulletproof windscreen forward. I was fortunate; never got hit by flak.
Never. That's extraordinary.
No, I fired that a lot. I never picked up any flat. I picked up a couple of bullet holes from another airplane, but.
So did you ever get into a dogfight with a German?
Yeah, and when we first went operational, we were escorting before the 9th Air Force was completely operational. We were escorting the 8th Air Force, and we would just carry the early penetration, and the P-51s would pick up the farther penetration. By then, the Germans had pretty much pulled their fighters back to take advantage of when the Jugs couldn't couldn't escort the B-17s, B-24s any further. But in any event, so most of my experience, of course, was in a tactical mode where we were working closer to the lines or closer to the battlefield, if you will. And I only encountered German aircraft 3 times out of my 99 missions. Once I got a probable. Another time I got a confirmed. Another time I got some holes in me. So take your choice.
And what were those aircraft that you came in contact with?
109s.
All 109s. Okay.
Yeah, it's all 109s. And as a young, eager fighter pilot, I remember they're constantly talking about, look, if you get a guy in your sight and you got a sure thing, you're all ready to nail him, you better check your 6 before you start firing. And I thought, man, if I ever get in that position, that'll never happen to me. I'll probably fire and never look behind me. And once I was in that position, I had this guy nailed. I was close, I had the lead drawn on him, and I looked behind me, and there was a 109, and he had lead on me because I could see his belly. He got his nose up a little bit, and I just did an immediate break out of there, and that's the one where I picked up a couple of holes, but
okay.
Nothing. I heard his guns, by the way.
Did you?
Yeah.
And how did you feel, or was it a case that you were so well trained that you didn't think at all, you just reacted?
No, it was just reactive.
Because I always find that extraordinary, because everybody says that. No, you don't think about anything, you just do it. And I suppose, I used to play rugby, and I guess it's the same thing. You don't think about stuff, you just do it, because you've done it time and time and time again, and it becomes second nature.
It's natural, yeah.
Yeah. And of course, people like me, we hear the story that you just told, and we think, yeah, that's bloody amazing. He's a hero, and I think you are a hero, as I do all the other guys that went through this. But actually, what you guys think is, no, we were just doing a job. We were just doing.
That's right. Just doing a job.
Yeah, and I always have a bit of a chuckle when I hear that. So just to take things back a little bit then. So when you got your confirmed kill on the 109, can you talk me through that? What were the circumstances?
Let's see. Normally, when we launch missions for close support, of whatever it happened to be, normally we were supporting the 4th Armored Division. I can still remember their call sign was Egg Yolk of all things. But in any event, we normally launched anywhere from 4 to 8 attack airplanes. That'd be 4 to 8 airplanes that were carried bombs or later on rockets. I was gone about the time we started using air-to-ground rockets. But you'd usually have a cover flight of 4. They weren't carrying any external ordnance, but they were just exactly that. They were the protection for the guys doing the air-to-ground work, in case anybody comes up and says, hey, wait a minute, we don't want you doing that kind of stuff. Well, I was in a cover flight on this one when this, goodness me, there's something the Air Force uses now, I can't remember, this gaggle in any event of 109s, and it was just like a beehive. So we lit into them, and that's when that happened. One guy started to go high, I started to go high, went after him. He was out climbing me, so I said, oh, I'll get away from the animal. Oh, hey, here's another guy. And that's when I woke up and found, hey, wait a minute, you better get out of here because that guy's behind you, or another guy is. So that's pretty much it.
And it was all over?
That kind of a circumstance where we were covering a flight that was doing air-to-ground work.
And it was all over very quickly, I presume.
Oh yes, oh yes. And inevitably, you have a nice organized ship of rather covered flight of 4 aircraft in spread formation during their zigzags and circling and crossovers and the like to make sure that you're covering the guys below. And then you get into a hassle, and it's everywhere. And after you look around, where is everybody?
Extraordinary.
Yeah.
Extraordinary. And you carried, what, 50mm machine guns? 6 of them or 8 of them?
8 of them. 8. The jug had 8 50 calibers.
Okay. Okay, so now just moving back then to when you arrived in Britain. So you arrived in Scotland, you probably caught a train down to... I presume you were based somewhere down on the bottom...
East Anglia.
East Anglia.
Yeah, we're at a little place called Wormingford. And I'm trying to think of the name. Oh, it's just outside of Colchester.
Okay. Because that's very flat there, of course, and
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
and you guys had a large number of airfields in that area, as did we, for that matter.
Yes. Yeah, lots of airplanes around there.
And the skies must have been pretty full of B-17s and P-51s and P-47s at certain...
A lot of it was timing. You see, when we were doing escort work, we might have a penetration assignment, and they'd come in and wake us up, and they'd say briefing in 15 minutes or 30 minutes or whatever it happened to be, and you'd hear these guys up there, and they're already airborne. The B-17s, the B-24s, just round and round and gathering them up. It took them quite a while, to gather up the formation, because there was 60 aircraft in those box formations.
Yeah.
And then those box formations were supposed to get in trail, so you can imagine.
and how high would they be?
Over
20?
Over England, they're still climbing, but when we were escorting them, we were briefed that they'll be at 23,000 feet. Well, the B-17s were usually at 23,000 feet. The B-24s seemed to struggle, and they're more often than not at 21,000. The advantage the B-24 had over the B-17 is that they had real long legs, so they were especially effective in the Pacific. Not particularly effective in Europe because they couldn't take the pounding that the B-17s could take.
Yeah. The RAF used them a lot for maritime work, looking for the U-boats.
Mm-hmm. Yes, B-17s, they used them there in the Atlantic to cover that spot in the middle of the ocean where the airborne stuff couldn't reach.
Yeah. So, okay, going back now to when you were in England. So, did you live in huts? Were they sort of prefabricated huts that you were staying in, or did you stay in those?
The Nissen huts.
Okay.
British Nissen huts, and we stayed there, and then
Must have been bloody cold in winter.
Oh yeah, a little stove in the center, and we had a very tight ration of coal that didn't burn very warm in any of that. And then a separate little building for the ablutions hut, and it was all that way.
Did you have hot water for your showers and so on?
Yeah, you didn't freeze before it got hot. And it wasn't really hot; it was warm.
Okay. And food?
And it was long woolen underwear, wearing time to stay warm. Then for some reason, I don't know why, we were moved down to south of London to a little place called Headcorn at an airfield there, and I ran across somebody here locally, a Brit, by the way, who was at our air museum where I volunteer, and he said, "Where were you stationed?" I said, "Well, at one time I was at Headcorn." He says, "Oh, really? That airport? The airfield still exists."
Yeah.
Yeah, and that was down in Kent County. But let's see, that was pretty much in England, and then after the invasion, we moved on over to Normandy.
So on D-Day, what were you doing? Were you doing ground attack, or were you doing higher level cover?
We were doing cover. We had one of our missions was escorting the daylight drop of the gliders and paratroopers, and we figured, oh man, they only go in at about 800 to 1,000 feet high elevation.
Wow.
We thought, if anything's going to draw the German fighters out, this is it. We didn't see a single one. I think the Germans only flew about 3 stories over the beachhead that particular on the 6th.
Yeah. I wouldn't want to have been one of those German pilots.
Along that line, you know, that's when they put on the invasion stripes to make it easier for the ground people not to shoot at the wrong, you know, at the good guys. And then to cover the Navy, they want to make doggone sure. So the only fighters that provided top cover for the ships were P-38. Now it's pretty hard to distinguish a P-38 from, you know, anything German. So
that's a Lightning, is it? The twin spars out at the back. Okay.
Yes,
yeah.
Lightning.
Yeah. Yeah, I could see that because my dad used to say, well, actually, I need to say this. He did have a great respect for the Americans. So don't take what I'm saying as the wrong way. But he said that towards the end of the war, he and his fellow pilots spent more time worrying about being shot down by the Americans than by the Germans.
Well, there's no question about it. This friendly fire took down some people.
Yeah.
No question about it.
So, okay, so how soon after D-Day did you actually move over to France?
It was about 30 days later. I can't remember the name of the place. 812 was the American designation for the strip, but it was just a strip where the engineers came in and leveled the ground and put on this extra heavy type kind of a tar paper thing. You know, it wasn't wet. So, and that, you know, was meant to last about 30 days, and that's as long as it lasted. But in any event, what I remember about being there, now, of course, we moved from Nice in northern England, rather than East Anglia, down to Kent County into tents, and then over to France, again in tents and slip trenches.
Because it rained a lot that June. It was pouring with rain much of the time. So you must have been living in fairly unpleasant circumstances.
Well, by the time we got over there, it had dried up. The weather was lousy on the 5th and 6th of June, and then they had that big storm that came through there that took out a bunch of the
mulberries.
The little wharves that they had built in there, for the floating docks, whatever they used to offload. But the thing I remember about 812 was, you know, they did a lot of planning, and they figured that, okay, on this date, and this field is ready, the front line should be here, wherever here was. However, it turned out that when we got over there, the front line was not quite so far away. Our strip ran, it was a single strip, and it ran parallel to what you would call the front. And we had to lay our patterns to the north, otherwise you could get shot at in the pattern. You know, maybe thought that, you know, come on guys, it's all right when I'm out there making an attack, but when I'm in the pattern at home, that's not fair.
Very uncivilized. Well, this guy that I interviewed, Gunther Rahl, he was one of the German pilots that I interviewed.
Yeah.
He told me the story. They were, at one stage, they had to take off in a hurry because the Russians were coming down the runway in their tanks.
Oh my word, that's
and he stuck his mechanic in the back of his 109 and took off.
Yeah, went off without a shoot. Yeah. I did that for my crew chief once, just to give him an idea what the P47 was like. It's really awkward to fly, but you know, I sat on his lap and I left it shoot in the backpack at home, rather, you know, back on the base.
Wow. No, I think that would have been the highlight of his Air Force career. So, so when you were in France, I gather, I bet you sort of moved around a lot, and you followed the army a good deal.
Yes. While I was with the outfit, I was in the outfit until October of '44. Now, like the Brits, we ran a rotation thing, not like the Germans, where they left them in there until they died or whatever.
Yeah.
At the time that I was in there, the tour for a fighter pilot in the 9th Air Force was 250 operational hours. Yeah, 250 operational hours. Well, I did that in 99 missions. But let's see, we moved from 812 down to Rennes, which is, you know, farther south and at the foot of the Brittany Peninsula. And then in late September, then by then Patton had gone screaming across the country, across France. So anytime we had to do any, we did, when we were first down there in Rennes, we were doing mostly supporting the army on Brest until the Brittany Peninsula was secured. Well, then to support Patton in the east, we had to land somewhere to refuel. So what they did was they'd hang the bombs on our birds and give us the fuses. We'd carry them in the cockpit, and we'd go to another forward base and they'd top off our fuel, put the fuses in, and we'd run our mission from there.
Wow.
And then you'd have to fly home. And of course that wouldn't do very long, so they moved us next to a strip outside of, I can never pronounce his name correctly, Reims, France. Reims, France. Yeah, we moved to Reims. That was my last move of the outfit, but it made a couple more after that. And of course, when we were at Reims, we were much closer to the battle line, so we could support much easier.
And I think that people of my generation, I'm 50. We kind of, when we think of going to France or Italy or wherever it might be, we think of the food and the culture and the architecture and so on. And but you guys would have eaten standard military issue rations, I presume.
Yes, but I can remember that when we were there at Reims, we were outside, and there was a little town nearby, and one of the guys in the squadron was quite fluent in French. And we went off to a little restaurant that apparently, they did all right. They said, okay, I can still remember, let's see, the pomme de terre free, and what was the steak was Gruyere, something Gruyere. But he could speak French, so we had a pretty decent meal there.
And I bet the French loved you. I'm sure they thought you were,
Yeah, we certainly spread our money around there.
Yeah.
And at that time, when we were in Normandy and Rennes, a lot of the air crews picked up colds. When we got to Reims, the group commander says, I'm trying to have my air crews being sick, and he took over. We took over a chateau there. And it was big. To give you an idea of the size of it, it was large enough to take care of all of the officers of the group, and that would have been something in the realm of 150. So it was pretty big. Now, of course, we're kind of cozy inside, needless to say. And two of the squadrons got to stay in the regular house, and one squadron got to stay in the servants' quarters, which were part of the building, of course, but a little bit more primitive. And the guys drew straws, and as you might not imagine, our squadron got one of the servants' quarters, but it still beat tense.
Yeah. When my dad was in Italy, they at one stage they stayed in a country house that belonged to the Duke of Florence, and he told this story that they'd been in tents through North Africa and Palestine and so on, and suddenly they found themselves living in this great big house. And they used to park their planes on the front lawn, and when they were scrambled, they'd run out of the front of the building and jump in their planes and take off. I think it's a lovely picture. So, this you were talking about how you were rotated after 250 hours. I mean, these Germans that I spoke to, you're quite right. They sent them back until eventually they couldn't fly anymore. They were either wounded or dead. And each of the pilots I spoke to, each of the Germans I spoke to, they either flew to the very end of the war because they were lucky. I think they were lucky, or very good pilots, or they were taken out because they were wounded. Gunter Rahl had his thumb shot off, and it became very badly infected. He got blood poisoning and became very sick. That saved his life. Theo Nauer, who was a 109 pilot, who shot down a P47, by the way. Two marauders in a P47, and then the wingman of the P47 pilot shot him down.
Oh boy, that's what he's there for.
Yeah, exactly the situation you were talking about earlier on. So he got all excited about shooting down this P47, and then suddenly he he found himself in a good deal of trouble and had to bail out. And when he bailed out, he hit either the aerial or the tail, and he really badly broke his arm. And it was so badly broken they were thinking they might have to amputate it. But that saved his life, because he never flew again.
Yeah, what's his name? Galan was in the same position. He lasted that long, and then he got injured there near, the end of the war, so he survived. What was I going to say? Oh, and the Brits had a similar training routine, but our people, once they'd done a tour, they come back to the States, and then they were set up as instructors on these, new forming squadrons or the operational training units where they could impart their experience. So you had, it was a good system.
Yeah.
The kids okay? I hear you're one of them.
I know that's my chair. It needs oiling, I think. No, my kids are fine, I think. Are you okay?
Yes, I'm fine.
You're fine?
Yeah.
Say hello to Jim.
Hello.
Or actually, Colonel, you need to call him Colonel Ashford.
Good morning, or good evening, boys. Have a good sleep.
And girls, this is a question I want to ask you. And I have now several times asked this question in the company of my son, because I often take Thomas along to these interviews because he quite enjoys them. He's been here all along, by the way, eavesdropping on the conversation. But what I like to ask you guys is, what would you say to my son about war?
Yeah. Well, it's just the ultimate thing that we don't want to get to if we can avoid it. We always want to be prepared for it, but to me, it's a failure of the politicians to get together or come to some form of agreement so that we can get away from this, because it's just ridiculous. And certainly, Britain found it true in World War I, where they practically lost a whole generation of young men. And, that was really criminal. Now, there weren't that many lost in World War II, but still an awful lot of the younger generation, which would have been the foundation of any country, were lost. And it's just, but if it happens, you want to be prepared. What more can I say? I don't know if they feel the same way, but that's the way I feel.
Yeah, no, that's a good answer. Good answer indeed. Okay, Jim. Well, thank you very, very much. It's been an absolute pleasure talking to you, and fascinating to hear your stories.
Yep.
And Thomas says yup too.
Yeah, I hear that.
Okay. All right,
okay,
then.
well, it's good talking to you, and good night to you and yours.
Okay. All the best for now.
Good night.
Bye.
Okay. See you, Jim. Bye-bye. Thanks very much.
Bye.
Okay. Cheerio.
Aloha.
Aloha.
Bye.
Aloha. What a nice guy.
Yep. Right.
Hi, it's John Bradley here. I hope you enjoyed my chat with Colonel Jim Ashford as much as I did, and I can assure you I enjoyed it a lot. He's such a nice guy.